Welcome again, Dadhichi here from Astrological.com.au, and you know what, as an introduction to June 2015, I do want to talk about the myth of retrogression. I mean, it's almost become an urban myth. You know, you hear it everywhere. Lay people talk, "Oh, I'm having a bad day, you know, Mercury's retrograde. It's terrible, I'm losing everything, Mercury's retrograde." Poor Mercury is just getting blamed for all the problems of mankind. And the fact of the matter is, retrogression is not unique to the planet Mercury. It occurs to many of the other planets as well. And let's be clear on one thing straight up front. Excuse me. The retrogression is not an actual happening. It's an apparent motional phenomenon. In other words, very much like if you're driving your car on the freeway and you're doing 100k and the car next to you in the lane next to you is doing 80, the car next to you appears to be going backwards, but that is not in fact happening. That is simply based upon the relative motion of the two vehicles. And retrogression of the planets is very, very much like that as well. So that's the first point we have to understand. Secondly, there are so many different opinions as to what a retrograde planet actually does, that, you know, we need to step back and we need to research these things. And that's the problem with astrology generally, you know. And I must say, I'm probably a little bit guilty of that too, doing this year market astrology. You know, actually we should look at the individual horoscope on its merits and apply the, you know, tests of time and experience to pronouncing judgments on what these phenomena actually mean in terms of interpreting them in the lives of people like you and I, and also mundane events and political events, so on and so forth. But let's be clear, firstly, that Mercury is not wholly good or wholly bad for each and every of the 12 signs. That's the first point. For example, if you're an Aries ascendant or Aries sun sign, Mercury will rule the third and the sixth direction, that is Gemini and Virgo. If we look at Taurus, Mercury will then take jurisdiction over the second and fifth house. Now, these are very, very different directions, and third and sixth house, according to astrologers, is somewhat malefic. More malefic if Mercury is ruling, say, the eighth house. But for Taurus, the second and fifth house is wonderful. And there is a dictum in ancient Vedic astrology that says, you know, the retrogression of a malefic empowers that planet, the retrogression of a benefic empowers that planet. So what does this mean? It simply means that if Mercury, for your rising sign or sun sign, happens to rule malefic directions, then it assumes a malefic role. The other thing too with Mercury is that if its association is with a malefic planet, such as Mars or with Saturn, then it's what we call a hermaphroditic or convertible planet. It will start to take on the colour of those malefic planets. If, on the other hand, it's with a benefic planet, then it assumes the qualities of those benefic planets. So there are a lot of fine details that we need to look at before we pronounce that Mercury is horrible. So that's an important point. Looking first and foremost at the star sign, the rising sign, and of course the lunar sign, and then judging from those perspectives what directions Mercury actually rules. By understanding that, we can say safely, if you're a Taurus or a Taurus ascendant, or, you know, the lunar sign is Taurus, then Mercury is going to assume a good role, and its retrogression is going to empower it to do good. So, you know, you just need to look around you and think clearly about these things, in that not everyone under a retrograde Mercury is going to have the same sorts of problems. There are plenty of people that sign contracts under the retrogression of Mercury and do quite well. On the other hand, there are some people that sign contracts under the retrogression of Mercury and they tend to have problems. Now, it doesn't mean to say that even for those of us who have beneficial results from Mercury, that we shouldn't be more circumspect and go over our facts and figures a little more carefully under these transits. taking that example of Taurus, Mercury then assumed the role of one of the finance rulers, the second ruler, finance, and the fifth house of speculation. So though that is good, I would say to someone born under Taurus, look, yeah, be a little bit careful. Measure your expenditures, and particularly if you're looking at gambling. You know, fifth house is speculation. Fifth house is children. Be careful of how much money you give your child. You may not get it back. Have some agreements in place. I mean, it's not going to be disastrous if you give $20 to your child and you don't get it back, but I think you get the gist. There's another very interesting area of astrology that I've researched for many, many years. I've had the absolute honour of being able to visit the Nadi readers in India, where the Akashic records, the histories of all of us, are accounted for on ancient palm leaves, and these records are deciphered through the thumbprint, which is uniquely individual genetically to each of us. Anyhow, to cut a long story short, these records also come with many, many different principles of astrology, and one of those does relate to the retrogression of planets. They have a very interesting concept there, and that is, let me give you an example. If we see Mercury retrograde in the sign of Libra, then they have this principle that says the retrogressed planet is visualizing the house behind it. The house behind Libra is Virgo. So we could assume, if again I'm using Taurus as the example here, the sixth house would be Libra, which is not a particularly good house for planets, but having the retrogressed planet, Mercury, Venus, Mars, in that sixth house would, according to some of these principles, liken Mercury to being in the fifth house. And being Virgo, that's what we call the exaltation or ucha point,